Hope you set your clocks forward. Hello and welcome to another episode of IU Sports Sunday here on WGCL. I'm Nick Rodecap with you. And it's a little darker this morning, but that's a sign that spring is either here or it wants to be here soon enough. And that means that we've got a lot to talk about. Of course, it's March, which means it's postseason basketball time. And Indiana men's basketball did wonders for itself yesterday, taking down Ohio State on Senior Day. And I don't know what it is about Senior Day and IU basketball, but it seems like these games are always nail-biters. You think back to last year when they took down Michigan State at home, now Ohio State this year. And I'll go back down memory lane to 2 years ago. Indiana, I believe, beat Michigan in overtime on Senior Day. So all the years that I've been a student here, at least, the Senior Day games have gone right down to the wire. And who else but Trey Galloway to deliver the game-winning shot, the game-deciding shot, the dagger, the game-icing shot, whatever you want to call it. Trey Galloway delivered the biggest shot of the game with time winding down on the shot clock. He pulled up from about 28 feet out and drained a three to push the IU lead to 5. Indiana would go on to win by 6 after Ohio State tried to foul a little bit. Trey Galloway has done a lot of things that I, along with many other people, have been left scratching our heads at. But he has been a competitor through and through for his entire career here at Indiana, which spans, of course, five seasons. He and Anthony Leal, the only two guys left from the Archie Miller days. And it's kind of fitting that both of them had a big impact on yesterday's game. Trey Galloway led all Indiana scorers with 16 points. He also led all Indiana players, had 6 of the team's 11 assists. That huge three with about a minute left really was the difference maker. And my jaw was on the floor when he made that shot, because as many Indiana fans will tell you, that's the kind of shot that teams usually hit against Indiana. You think back to a couple years ago, I guess it was 3 years ago now, Jordan Bohannon, that was 4 years ago, the Jordan Bohannon buzzer beater in the Big Ten tournament. I think that was 4 years ago. Maybe it was 3. I don't know. Jordan Bohannon played for like 7 seasons, so it was somewhere in that neighborhood. But Iowa's Jordan Bohannon hit a bank shot 3 at the buzzer to knock IU out of the Big Ten tournament. Those are the kinds of shots that guys usually hit against Indiana. You don't usually see Indiana players hitting those kinds of shots, but Trey Galloway hit one yesterday. Just incredible. Incredible stuff. That whole game, it was really ugly to start. It was extremely low scoring in the first half. I mean, the teams came out of the locker room and it was 29-25 Ohio State. I was thinking, man, I hope anybody who bet on this game bet the under, because the teams only ended up combining for 126 points. Meanwhile, if you were watching the St. John's Marquette game, those teams combined for, off the top of my head, about 175 points. That game was ridiculous. St. John's pulled it out in overtime. I mean, what Rick Pitino has done over there is nothing short of fantastic. I saw ESPN's bracketology projection. I bring up St. John's because somebody in the bracket bunker has Indiana, Louisville, and St. John's in the same region, which would be very funny, I think. So if you look at ESPN's bracketology projection after Indiana beat Ohio State, that was big because the winner of that game is most likely in the NCAA tournament. We were saying that all week. Indiana, of course, lost to Oregon on that tough Jackson Shellstad 35-foot desperation heave. Again, the kinds of shots that teams usually hit against Indiana. That was a deep three with the shot clock winding down. Shellstad hit it with Anthony Leal's hand right in his face. He somehow got it to go. It was ridiculous, and Shellstad is that kind of player, but Indiana fans are so used to seeing those kinds of shots, I don't even know if they felt anything watching that one go through. So Indiana had to beat Ohio State, and Indiana did beat Ohio State. So the Hoosiers won both head-to-head meetings over Jake Diebler's Buckeyes, which is big because now the Buckeyes are computer merchants. Their net rating is a lot higher than it probably should be. I don't think they're a quad 1 caliber team, but Indiana got a quad 1 win at home yesterday. So they are now out of the first 4, according to ESPN. You look at the Providence Regional, Louisville, the 6th seed, Indiana, the 11, St. John's and Towson, the other 2, the 3 and the 14. That's very interesting because, of course, Indiana and Louisville, two programs that completely whiffed on the NCAA tournament last year. But what Louisville has got going this year is special, very special. Their head coach, whose name slips my mind, even though it probably shouldn't, he was celebrating with the fans after the Cardinals win yesterday. They've won, I think, 17 more games this year than they did last year. That kind of turnaround is kind of akin to what Curt Cignetti did to Indiana football. So happy for the Louisville Cardinals fans until, of course, they play Indiana, if this bracket is to be believed. St. John's will get the 3 seed. They locked up the top seed in the Big East tournament. What are they, 27-4, 28-3, something ridiculous. Their best season since about 1990, which is very interesting to think about. But they took down Marquette yesterday, and they would meet Indiana if the Hoosiers were to beat Louisville in the first round. Mike Woodson said after the game, Indiana won 66-60 over Ohio State. He said it on CBS. Maybe I'm leaving here too soon. I don't know. And between Woodson, this being his final game at Assembly Hall, and, of course, Indiana's senior class going out, so many guys, not just, scholarship players, rotation players, but also managers, the unsung heroes, if you will, of the Indiana basketball program going out. I think there were 9, at least 9 guys between the managers and the walk-ons as well. But top of mind for Indiana going out. Trey Galloway, Anthony Leal, Umar Ballo. Lou Goody is trying to get a medical waiver to come back because I think it was his sophomore season. He played 10 games before he got hurt. If the Big Ten gave a waiver to Xavier Johnson, I would say Luke Goody has a decent chance of getting one. And how big would that be for him to come back to Indiana? A guy who a lot of people wanted to see spend his entire career at Indiana. Having the chance to get one last go-around with a new head coach would be pretty cool to see. Umar Ballo going out as well. A lot of these one-year guys, Dallas James, Langdon Hatton, guys who were only in Bloomington for one season. And again, Dallas James is 7 feet tall, and I think he's bigger than Umar Ballo, at least from a height perspective. Why in the world does he not play? I don't know. You think if you need somebody to give fouls, then he might be your guy, but that's a discussion for another time. A lot of these one-year guys, they leave and you don't really feel as attached to them because they were only with the program for a calendar year, and at this point it hasn't even been that long. But, guys like Trey Galloway, Anthony Leal, it's kind of sad seeing them leave. Obviously, Galloway and Leal both went through senior day last year. But still, they've been staples of this program for so long. I mean, Anthony Leal is from Bloomington, of course. Both these guys, Indiana kids. And seeing them, play their final game and both play as well as they did and have much of an impact as they did was really special to see. Of course, Anthony Leal, not exactly going to light up the scoring column, but Leal had 8 rebounds, which was tied with Luke Goody for the team lead. Two guys you usually don't think of as big rebounding threats, but Goody and Leal both had more boards than Umar Ballo. Which is interesting. It just feels like either it's against Purdue or it's on senior day. On these bigger stages, the guys from Indiana tend to shine, which I think is cool, and I think it's fitting too. Luke Goody, just 1 of 6 from 3 yesterday, but still had 11 points, along with those 8 rebounds, just 2 boards shy of a double-double, which for a typical 3-point sharpshooter is not bad. So all in all, a successful senior day for Indiana men's basketball yesterday. And Trey Galloway shot to decide the game, again, incredible. That crowd pop at Assembly Hall was nothing short of awesome. Incredibly cool to witness, and hopefully it gives Indiana sort of momentum going into the Big Ten tournament in Indianapolis. The men will do the same thing the women did this past week and square off against Oregon in the 8-9 matchup. The only difference is, I think Oregon is the... I have to check now. I have to check myself. Oregon is the 8 seed. So for both the men's and the women's games, Oregon is the 8, Indiana is the 9. The women, of course, beat Oregon before losing in a close one to USC. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. But Indiana will be in Indianapolis on Thursday. That game should be played at noon, I believe, if the women's game was any indication. We'll take a look at the bracket here real quick because it's important, I think. The 8-9 game is, we'll check on it. I want to make sure it's right, that's all. The 8-9 game will take place at noon on Thursday. It's the first game on Thursday on BTN. I wonder, there should be a lot of IU students there because that's the day that spring break starts for a lot of people. I suspect a lot of professors will probably cancel class on Thursday because that's what tends to happen. So there should be a really good Indiana contingent at Gainbridge Fieldhouse for that game as the Hoosiers look to make a run. You win that game against Oregon in Indy, you will definitely be out of the first four. You lose, you still might get a play-in depending on how the rest of the bracket shakes out. But Indiana certainly did what it had to do yesterday. And Trey Galloway, a big reason for that. And Mike Woodson said that, Galloway's been through a lot. And he said it was only fitting that Galloway hit the biggest shot of the night. And that he couldn't be more proud of Trey Galloway. So that was really cool to see. And we'll talk more about March Madness as a whole because, man, it's already kicked off. And I'll tell you why I feel bad for people who wait until March to watch college basketball. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotocap with you. And, since we set our clocks forward today, it's a good time to tell you about IU Credit Union. It's a great time to save at IU Credit Union. Go to iucu.org to see their most current money market savings and certificate rates. That's iucu.org, IU Credit Union. And, I said before the break, I wanted to talk about why I feel bad for people who wait until March to watch college basketball. It's because it's the greatest sport. It is the greatest sport. And I'll admit, because I had a lot of extracurriculars going on that took up my weekends and weeknights and really all my free time. Prior to this year, I didn't follow college basketball outside of the Big Ten that much before this year. But I've had the chance to do that a little more this year, a lot more actually. And I do not know how you can wait until the tournament to watch it. Like, it doesn't matter until the tournament. The difference that I love between college basketball and the NBA is that because there are obviously way fewer games in college basketball than there are in the NBA, every single game matters. And the other thing I love about college basketball, and maybe this is also a product of there being, 51 fewer games than the NBA regular season, and those games being 8 minutes shorter per. There's no load management. Guys play every game if they're healthy, which is really cool because you get to see the best college players in the country night in and night out, which is awesome. Cooper Flagg did not have any load management concerns this season at Duke. Janai Broome at Auburn didn't have any load management concerns. Umar Ballo, who plays like 35 minutes a game, at least he did for a while, and Indiana basically ran the entire offense through him for a good chunk of the season. There's no load management for him. There's load management in the NBA all the time, and it got so bad they had to change the qualification criteria for the postseason honors because guys were sitting out huge chunks of the season, like Jimmy Butler, and then just, popping up when it was time for the postseason. That doesn't happen in college basketball, and there's always the potential for chaos. You look at Wisconsin, Penn State yesterday, senior day in Madison, Wisconsin, and of all teams, Penn State wins over Wisconsin. That makes no sense. You look at Penn State this season, they're not even going to qualify for the Big Ten tournament. Right now, they're 17th in the conference standings. Wisconsin's a consensus top 4 team in the Big Ten, top 15 in the country. And for some reason, Penn State goes to Madison and wins. Not only do they win by a comfortable margin, 86-75. Wisconsin led by as much as 13 about 5 minutes in. And if you remember when Indiana went up there, Wisconsin led by 22 8 minutes in. So it seems that Wisconsin likes getting off to hot starts at home. Somehow, though, Penn State rallied and outscored Wisconsin 51-35 in the second half to beat the Badgers and spoil their senior day festivities. DeMarco Dunn led the way for Penn State, had 25 points on 83% field goal shooting. So for Penn State, hey, if we're going down, we're going to take somebody else down with us, and that is what they did yesterday in Madison. Those kinds of things happen all the time in college basketball, and that's what makes it so great. You know, March Madness is obviously madness for a reason, and there is nothing like it, but I do feel for the folks who don't get to experience the regular season because they choose not to. They choose to ignore the sport until, the bracket comes out because, it might not matter as much, but man, they're missing out. So if you or someone you know are suffering from college basketball withdrawal, consult your nearest college basketball fan for assistance. Refer them to somebody who loves college basketball to introduce them to one of the greatest sports in the world. And again, this roller coaster of a season that Indiana has had. You think back to the Illinois game, which was almost 2 months ago now. This Indiana team could have folded so easily. Could have gone into their shell and just had the season fizzle out. Fans were chanting for Woodson's firing. I was extremely critical of him, and he deserved the criticism, don't get me wrong. But this team has fought through that. And they have, it might be partly that the pressure is completely gone, right? That's not necessarily a bad thing, though. They're playing more free, I think, than they were before. And sure, did they underwhelm this season? Yes, don't get it twisted. I don't think when the season started, I on this show or anybody else was thinking that 19-12 and 10-10 in the Big Ten was going to be the expectation, because actually that's the exact same conference record that Indiana had last year, which we kind of wrote off as a lost season. Now, Indiana finished that one 19-14, so there's a chance they could finish with the exact same record across the board this year if they were to lose in the first game of the Big Ten tournament and lose in the first game of March Madness. They would finish with the exact same record as last year. So this was an underwhelming season, barring like an Elite Eight run. I think that's a safe bet. Okay, Sweet 16, fine. Since that has become, unfortunately, the ceiling for this program for the last very long time. And we'll just leave it there. I think 2016 and 2012, it's been a long time. Make the Sweet 16, we'll call it a success. But for Indiana to be as low as they were, say after that Illinois game, when the Illini could have scored 100 points if they didn't stop trying, for them to fight back and for them to just give it everything they've had, that's all anybody wanted all along, was for this team to give everything they had every single game. And again, I go back to the losses that I witnessed in person covering for student media at Nebraska and at Iowa. I drove to those games. I drove myself and two other of my student media friends. We went and called those games in Lincoln and in Iowa City. I put about 2,500 miles on my car doing that and spent a ton of money on gas. And watched Indiana basically just get run out of the gym both times. And it seemed like once they got down, there was no desire to get back in it. And I talked about that as kind of a concerning trend that I saw. That trend has since completely flipped on its head. Indiana did not get off to a great start against Ohio State yesterday. Again, that game was ugly. It was, I think Indiana had scored 9 points about 8 minutes in. It was not pretty. But Indiana didn't fold. And part of that is it being senior day, being at home, whatever. But the fact is Indiana fought the entire time. And ultimately, one of your seniors made a huge shot to salt the game away. Trey Galloway with that ridiculous three-pointer. And it's tough because Tuesday night, Indiana was toe-to-toe with Oregon the entire game, which was horrendously officiated, by the way. That game was just completely botched by the Big Ten officiating crew. The fact that the free throws were so lopsided was ridiculous, considering how physical it was on both sides. And I actually want to go back and look at those free throw numbers real quick because it was comical. Indiana shot 7 free throws and missed 4. That's a problem, yes. Oregon shot 21 free throws to Indiana's 7. They shot 3 times as many free throws, which Mike Woodson used some very colorful language to describe as not cool, basically. Jackson Shellstad made Oregon's only three-pointer of the second half to give the Ducks a lead that they would not give up. And it was a ridiculous shot that I could not believe. I was calling that game at the WIUX Sports Studios. Couldn't believe that shot. But Indiana fought the entire time. And it's easy to kind of come back east, you lose sleep, you just got punched in the mouth, and you can fall flat and then not recover. But Indiana recovered. Indiana fought, the home crowd got behind them, and they delivered. And that's all the fans wanted all along. The true fans, I think, never quit on this team. Obviously, you're going to be frustrated when things go poorly, or you're just going to kind of give up. You're going to maybe disassociate from the team when things get bad. We talked about that in my sport marketing class. It's called cutting off reflected failure. You want the good times, but you don't want the bad. And I think some fans kind of fell into that. But the truer fans, I think, the tried and true fans, it's in the fight song, for goodness sakes, guys. And Indiana delivered. Now, can you go on a run in March Madness? Can you make something happen? Because all you need is a shot. All you need is a shot. Just look at NC State. NC State had no business being even in the NCAA tournament before the ACC tournament happened last season. And wouldn't you know, they made the Final Four, which was probably the worst thing that could have happened for them because now their head coach is locked up there, and they probably should have fired him because they're really bad again. But those are the kinds of things that really can only happen in college basketball. Because you look at other sports, college football, of course, generally speaking, the teams with the most talent win. That's just how football works. The teams with, as is the case right now, the largest NIL budgets tend to be the last ones standing. Success breeds success in college football. You look at college baseball. The teams with the deepest pitching staffs tend to be the last ones standing. Those pitching staffs are generally found on SEC and ACC teams. That's just how it is. But in college basketball, anything can happen. And that is why, again, if you or someone you know does not watch college basketball until March, then get some help. Watch college basketball throughout the season because every game matters and every game deserves the same attention because you don't get that in the NBA with load management, with 82-game seasons. People really don't care about the NBA that much, but you got to care about college basketball from the jump because if your team gets jumped, they might pay come March. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotacap with you. And, you know, Mike Woodson said after yesterday's win over Ohio State on Senior Day that he thinks maybe he's leaving too soon. Leaving too soon from Indiana. And he elaborated by talking about how his last game that he played against Ohio State was for the Big Ten title in Assembly Hall. His last game in Assembly Hall was against Ohio State for the Big Ten title. It's kind of weird how those things come full circle. I think it's weird anyway. I think it's cool. That, like, for example, when Indiana played Oregon, the last time Indiana played Oregon before this past week, Mike Woodson scored like 36 points and had 6 rebounds against the Ducks. Those kinds of things, it's just interesting how they seem to align. Obviously, Indiana wasn't playing for the Big Ten title when they played Ohio State, which was something that Woodson said Indiana would be doing, playing for Big Ten titles, and that didn't happen, which is one of the reasons that he agreed to part ways with the program. But I think it's great for his legacy that Indiana's had this surge to close the year. And who's to say it should stop now, right? They should continue, building off this momentum, and who knows what happens once you get to the tournament, right? But for Mike Woodson's legacy, he was in real danger, I think, of almost, I wouldn't say people forgetting about his legacy as a player, but people overlooking that and instead focusing on his failed tenure as a coach. That was just, 2 months ago. And he's been very heavily criticized, of course, because this is a job that carries with it a ton of pressure, a ton of expectations, a ton of historical significance. And he is just the latest in a long line of coaches who the fans do not believe have lived up to their expectations. But I think that this has done a pretty good job, all things considered, of salvaging Woodson's legacy as a coach. Obviously, as a player, his legacy has been set in stone long before I was even born, right? One of the greatest players in IU basketball history. That legacy was set in stone 35, 40 years ago. But as a coach, if you can get Indiana back to the NCAA tournament 3 times in 4 years, I think that's a good legacy to leave behind because, Archie Miller was flat out awful, and he never should have been hired. There are some people who think Tom Crean never should have been fired. He was fired for a reason. But relative to where Indiana was when Woodson came in, he's done a good job, I think, of turning the program back in the right direction. Did he get them over the hump? No. Both things can be true. Woodson's a great guy. His players obviously love him. They've stuck by him through a really tough stretch where there was so much outside noise, it would have been easy for everyone to turn on each other and, go just completely bring the season south. But that didn't happen. And you look at what Indiana was able to do against Purdue. Purdue had its best run in program history and still only beat Indiana 50% of the time, which means Indiana beat Purdue 50% of the time. That included, for Purdue, a trip to the Final Four, a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. Just don't ask them what happened after that. But Purdue went on a ridiculous run over these last 4 seasons, and Indiana still beat them 50% of the time, which is what you should be able to ask for in a rivalry. I think that's impressive. Obviously, that's not the historical standard that Indiana basketball has been held to, and I understand that. But I do think that this run that Indiana basketball has been on to close this season, and hopefully will continue to go on as March wears on, and who knows, maybe April. I think that's good for Mike Woodson's legacy as a coach. It's just, it does feel like the end of an era now. It kind of dawned on me yesterday while the senior day speeches, of which there were only 2, which is kind of weird. But while the senior day celebrations were going on post-game, you kind of sit back and you think, wow, this is going to be a completely different program next year. And with the roster turnover that comes with the transfer portal now, you kind of get used to that. But from, the head coaching standpoint, I was thinking about this yesterday. Like, Woodson is, from a coaching perspective, obviously Quinn Buckner is on the board of trustees. He's the head of the board of trustees, I believe. But from a coaching perspective, Mike Woodson is the last connection to Bob Knight. So that's it just kind of dawned on me that era is going to be over once Woodson retires at the end of this season. You think back to when Bob Knight passed away back in November of 2023, and obviously that did a number on everybody who knew Bob Knight, who played for him, or who covered the program. Of course, Don Fisher, evidently it seemed to do a number on him. But I think he kind of saw it was coming down the pipe for a while. And for Woodson to have to coach that night, I think it was. I don't remember if Indiana played that night or if it was the women's team that played that night, but Indiana, of course, had to then soldier on into the season, and that could not have been easy for Woodson. But he is the last coaching link to Bob Knight at Indiana. And, you're going to be turning the page next season. Who's going to be turning that page? I don't know. There are rumors abound surrounding, Brad Stevens. I don't know. Who you can name your coach. There's probably a rumor somewhere. Whether or not those rumors have any substance, I don't think anything has any substance right now. It's all smoke, and as far as I can tell, there's no fire. But I do think that whoever you hire, they're going to be under a lot of pressure. Because I think Indiana fans are tired of the Sweet 16 seeming to be the ceiling. And that's been the case. I've talked about this a lot. That's been the case for over a decade plus. It's John Rothstein called it an interesting place, Indiana is. Because with all the resources that coaches have here, and especially now with NIL, it seems like, this team should be getting further more consistently. And it's not just a Mike Woodson thing, right? The resources have been here for a long time, and it just hasn't happened. I don't have the answers. I'm not in the program. I'm not connected to the program. I couldn't tell you why. Indiana basketball has been so historically underwhelming for most, if not all, of my lifetime, which is 21 plus years. But again, it's just kind of, sometimes you got to point it out to people that there I would say maybe 15% of the students on campus were alive when Indiana made the Final Four and lost to Maryland in the national championship in 2002. Maybe 20% of the student body was alive. And of that 15%, there may be a few like PhD students that might remember it because they may have been 6 or 7 years old when it was happening. But the bulk of students on campus have no recollection of that. And that's kind of crazy to think about, given Indiana's historical significance in college basketball. So whoever comes in is going to have a ton of pressure on them. And I think the lesson that they can take, given Indiana fans' frustrations with Mike Woodson the last couple years, don't make promises you can't keep. Because Woodson said that Indiana is going to be fighting for Big Ten and national championships, and that was why he came back, and it didn't happen, and people got mad. So if Indiana coach of the future doesn't want people to get mad, don't make promises you can't keep. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotocap with you, and Indiana women's basketball had their Big Ten tournament ended at the hands of USC, which, most teams would have happened to them, considering USC has arguably the best player in the country, and Juju Watkins. But they didn't go down without a fight, and I think it's encouraging for Terry Morin's team as they get ready for March Madness. The selection show, correct me if I'm wrong, is tonight. It should be after the Big Ten championship. And the bracket will be unveiled. Oh, that's right. Conference tournaments have to conclude, and then there's a week off. So the selection show is next week. I beg your pardon. But the Big Ten championship is tonight. It'll be two classic Big Ten powers going at it, of course, USC and UCLA. That's still just so weird to me. I don't know if I'll ever get used to it. But Indiana women's basketball lost by 5 points to USC, which, USC, number 2 team in the country, won the Big Ten. No, they didn't win the Big Ten regular season title. UCLA won the Big Ten regular season title. But, or did they? I don't know. I have to check because they're both good and I get them confused sometimes, and I'd be lying if I didn't. So I apologize. I apologize for that. I'm going to fact check myself because sometimes, we can be wrong, and it's okay to be wrong. USC did win the Big Ten regular season title. They were the top seed in the conference tournament, and they will play UCLA today for the conference championship. I'm sure UCLA has some feelings about how things went when they met in the regular season. But Indiana played USC down to the wire on the women's side after a convincing win against Oregon, which I'm sure Sydney Parrish, of course, who transferred back to Indiana from Oregon, was feeling very good about because she wanted another shot at them. She got it, and Indiana won. Indiana, from what I heard, I did not have a chance to watch the game, but from what I heard, Indiana smoked a ton of layups in this game, and that is just not going to cut it against the best team in the country. So, there's your big bugaboo. Indiana did go 8 of 19 from 3, but Chloe Moore McNeil from the floor shot just 3 of 13. I feel like she doesn't usually attempt that many shots. I feel like she's usually pass first, but she was second to Yarden Garzone in scoring for Indiana. The two of them combined for 40 points. Juju Watkins for USC had 31. Kiki Iriafen had 21. Yeah, that sounds about right for two of the best players in women's college basketball. There's not much you can do to contain them. You can just kind of hope to stay with them, and Indiana unfortunately could not do that in Gainbridge Fieldhouse, but they did not go down without a fight. And you think back to when USC came to Assembly Hall, Indiana played USC close then as well. So that tells me that this Indiana team, no, they're not the same as they've been the last few years, but they can still hang with anybody. You remember last year, it ended up being Mackenzie Holmes' final game at Indiana. They gave number 1 South Carolina, who of course went on to finish like 38-0 undefeated national champions. Indiana gave South Carolina the biggest scare of the season, regular or postseason. That was, I think, the closest game South Carolina played all year until the national championship. And that was a game that I think a lot of people would have seen at face value as, Indiana doesn't have a chance. But they did have a chance, and they played South Carolina extremely tough. They lost by 4 points. 4 points to the undisputed best team in the country last year that I believe finished the season 38-0. And they came within 2 possessions of winning. Now, Indiana was down huge in that game. If you think back, I remember we were watching it in the press box at Bart Kaufman Field during a baseball game that we were all covering. I say we as in the student media contingent. But South Carolina had a huge lead. I think it was late in the third quarter, maybe at halftime. You look at the halftime score, South Carolina was up by 15. So Indiana got that back nearly. I believe they either nearly tied it, but could not get over South Carolina, which is forgivable, again, considering they went undefeated and won the national championship. But if there's one thing about Terry Morin's teams is that they're going to give you nightmares in March. I don't know that any high seed wants to see Indiana women's basketball in March. I'll take a look at the projected bracket. Again, we talked about it on the Indiana men's side. The Hoosiers, a projected 11 seed, not in the first 4, but as one of the last 4 byes, which is, again, massive because you think back a few years ago when Indiana had to play the first 4 game in Dayton and then fly to Portland, Oregon. It did not go well. But Indiana, one of the last 4 byes on the women's side as well. They are projected as a 10 seed by ESPN's Charlie Cream, going to South Bend, which could be fun because, of course, Indiana fans travel well. And we saw a lot of cream and crimson when Indiana went up there for the college football playoff. So Indiana would take on Vanderbilt in the first round, and then, assuming Notre Dame gets by Lehigh, Indiana would face the Fighting Irish and Hannah Hidalgo for a trip to the Sweet 16, where they would probably face Texas, that or Ohio State or Alabama, any of those teams in the Birmingham Regional as well. Or sorry, I'm looking at the wrong side of the bracket. It would probably be UConn or Kentucky that Indiana would face. Could be interesting. Could be fun. Again, Indiana is playing some of its best basketball right now on the women's side, and you want to peak at this time of the year. They've done enough to get themselves into the tournament at this point. It's a question of where they'll end up. They should be able to avoid the play-in. So they'll be rested, they'll be fresh, they'll be confident, I feel like, going into the big dance wherever they end up. And if they end up going to South Bend, there will be a lot of Indiana fans at Notre Dame when that game takes place here in about a week and a half. I'm excited for March Madness to start up. Next week, plus about 8 hours, we'll have a bracket, which is awesome. I'm excited for it to be the part of the year where kids around the country are not paying attention in school because they're watching basketball. It's kind of a universal experience I think we've all had, either in middle school, high school, or both. Let's just admit it. It's pretty funny, actually. I always think back to when Indiana faced off against Michigan in the Big Ten tournament. It was Mike Woodson's first season, and Indiana was down huge in that game. I want to say it was in the 15 to 20 point range. The Hoosiers came back and won. It was on like a Thursday afternoon, and everybody in my section of my school, they were all watching the game. So when Indiana completed the comeback, everybody went crazy. Those are the kinds of experiences that only college basketball can bring about. I said it earlier, and I'll say it again. If you or someone you know does not watch college basketball until March, tell them to get help, because this is one of the greatest sports in the world. And we're getting ready for one of the greatest months of the year as far as sports goes between now and about April 8th or 7th or whenever the national championship is played. Sometime in early April, starting way too late, but it's coming up faster than you think, so sit back and enjoy it. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, hope you set your clocks forward, because this is the time the show would usually start if we were still an hour behind, but we're not. So welcome to hour number 2. I'm Nick Rodecap with you on this Sunday morning, and I was looking at the weather, and I know this sounds like small talk, but it's going to be 70 degrees on 2 or 3 occasions in Bloomington this week, including on Friday. And I say Friday is significant because Indiana baseball plays its first Big Ten game at home this season on Friday against Ohio State. I'll be broadcasting that game on Big Ten Plus if you can't make it, but I encourage you to try to make it out to Bart Kaufman Field. We have a forecast high of around 70 degrees. 6 o'clock first pitch. It's probably some light clouds, but it'll be maybe 60, 65 at first pitch. So maybe bring a sweatshirt if you want, but try to come out to Bart Kaufman Field. It'll be the start of spring break, so there might not be many students there. If you like the sights and sounds of baseball, that might be the game for you. Indiana baseball is in a weird spot right now. They played a doubleheader against Penn State on Friday, got blown out in the first game. They were down 14-3 in 4 innings, which is not great. But the Hoosiers mercy ruled Penn State in Game 2, won 17-6. Penn State's starter left that second game of the doubleheader in the first inning. Mason Horwat, who has gotten off to a very good start this season, did not get out of the first inning against Indiana, which was a big break. I wonder if maybe Penn State kind of punted that game and decided to just gun for the rubber match today at 1 o'clock. That remains to be seen, though. The Hoosiers have not been above 500 at all this year. They're 7-8 currently. Lost both games at home. They've only played 2, which is not uncommon for teams from this part of the country to spend a lot of time playing neutral site games or true road series in the first month or so of the season, just because it's usually too cold or too snowy or too miserable to play up here. But with Big Ten play kicking off, Indiana will be at home a lot more over the course of the next 2.5 months. And it's going to come at you fast. It always does with college baseball. So we look at Indiana baseball as a team that for the last couple years has sort of had the same story play out. I say couple years, 2024 and now this year in 2025, at least what we're seeing so far seems to be the same story as last season. And if you don't remember last season, I don't blame you because it's college baseball and it's very easy for things to, slip through the cracks. What we've got with Indiana baseball is a ton of offensive firepower backed up by absolutely zero consistent shutdown pitching. And it's easy to sit on the sidelines and talk about how, you need shutdown arms to win baseball games. It's, that's not rocket science. I played baseball for a long time, and as an offense, as a position player, it can be frustrating when, your offense is putting up, in the case of Indiana, a lot of runs per game. You look at Indiana's runs scored in just its last 3 games, 17, 9, and 11, and they only won 1 of those 3 games. They played Northern Kentucky on Tuesday, trailed 9-2 in the 5th inning, ultimately lost 13-11. Lost to Penn State on Friday morning, 15-9. That just cannot happen if you're a baseball team that, as Indiana does, has aspirations of making not just an NCAA regional, but an NCAA super regional, which is basically the baseball equivalent of the Sweet 16. It's the step before the College World Series. You look further back, runs per game scored by Indiana. Let's go back to their opening weekend in Surprise, Arizona. Indiana scored 12 runs and lost. Indiana scored 6 runs and lost. They also got 1 hit by Oregon State, but Oregon State's one of the best teams in the country. So, these kinds of losses, Indiana 7-8, they've lost now at least 3 games where they've scored 6 runs or more, which is generally the place you want to be as an offense. Score 6 runs or more and lose. That's not encouraging. You look at this in the context of the Big Ten, and it's tough because it's still very early in the season. You've got about 41 games left if you're Indiana, including today. But Indiana has, for the second year in a row, one of the 5 worst team ERAs in the Big Ten. The Hoosiers rank 14th out of 17. Of course, Wisconsin does not have a baseball team. Indiana has a 6.35 team ERA, which, as someone who covers the team, I can tell you that's pretty similar to what happened last year. The difference is, last year, Indiana baseball, you could write off the pitching struggles due to injuries. They lost all 3 of their starters to season-ending injuries before the year even began. That is very difficult to account for because in college baseball, every single team needs pitching depth. It just is not commonplace. It's not like Major League Baseball where every team has a reliable stable of arms they can go back to. Unless you're the Chicago Cubs, who also did not have a bullpen last year, and it cost them so many games I don't even want to go back to it because I'll raise my blood pressure to the point where I'll need to see a cardiologist. But it's been the same story now for the last couple seasons for Indiana baseball. And we can go beyond ERA as well if you want. Team WHIP, walks plus hits per innings pitched. Indiana is right in the middle of the pack. Go to walks per 9. Indiana is actually not awful, but again, middle of the pack. Batting average against, middle of the pack. So team ERA, 4th worst. It's early in the season. Yes, that is true. But Indiana has already squandered a lot of opportunities for resume-boosting non-conference wins. You could have gotten one of two against Xavier and been okay, but you lost both. And in that game, Indiana trailed 3-0 in the first inning. Against Northern Kentucky, you get down big in so many of these games. You were down 3-0 in the first inning. You were down 9-2 you were down 8-2 after 4 innings. It's just tough to consistently fight back when you get punched in the mouth like that so much. As a baseball team, when you're playing from behind so much, it's difficult. It's very difficult. Now, the defense didn't do any favors for Indiana early on either. And unfortunately, when the Big Ten changed the way they track the stats, it's not as easy now to find team fielding percentage as it was. I don't even know if you can on a conference-wide scale anymore. But you look at the offensive numbers for Indiana, and again, it's important to put it in the context that college baseball now is as friendly to offenses as it has ever been, because the average age of players is much higher than it used to be, and this is still a result of COVID and guys getting extra years. So you have a lot of 4th and 5th and 6th year seniors. The latter two, of course, are abnormal. A lot of guys who, if they were any good, would be playing professional ball at their age, but they're not. So they're playing against college guys, and if you're Indiana and you pitch a lot of freshmen, well, you can do the math. But you look at Indiana baseball right now, and they have 6 guys with an on-base plus slugging over 1,000. That should be enough to win you more than 48% of your games. Cooper Malamazian has only started 5 games. He's only had 21 at-bats, so we can maybe count him as not qualified. But Jake Hanley, Corbin Dickerson, Andrew Wiggins, Joey Brinchesky, Devin Taylor, all over 1,000. TJ Schuyler, who was supposed to be the backup catcher, has an OPS of 990, which is really darn good. And Tyler Cerny just shy of 900, which is really darn good as well. But in the context of Indiana, it puts him as the 5th or 6th best hitter. Indiana has so much offensive firepower, and they're wasting it again. This is the same thing that has happened for the last 2 years. This happened last year as well. Indiana had a loaded offense. They had, off the top of my head, 3 guys get drafted in the top 5 rounds. Carter Matheson, Brock Tibbetts, and Nick Mitchell. Center fielder, catcher / first baseman, and right fielder, respectively. All of whom are either from Indiana or Ohio. Those guys got drafted by major league teams in the first 5 rounds, which means they were really good. And the rest of that lineup was loaded too. Cerny and Taylor were part of that. Brinchesky was part of that. Wiggins became part of that down the stretch. This is a team that has one of the best offenses, I would argue, in the country. And they've showcased that. They're averaging an absurd amount of runs per game. You've got 144 runs scored over 15 games. That's nearly 10 runs per game. That should be enough to be better than 500. You're averaging 9.6 runs per game. Indiana generally wants to get over 6 or 7, and they generally have a good chance at winning. But so far, through the first, the first 3 weeks of the season, that just hasn't been the case. The pitching staff has not held up its end of the bargain. And it's so odd to me. It's way easier for me to sit here and be, just fix your pitching staff. But since Indiana hired pitching coach Dustin Glant, I think it was in 2022 when they hired him, the team ERA, especially in midweeks, has been putrid. And midweek games are tough because you throw a lot of guys who don't pitch on weekends, which means they're probably not your best guys. But Indiana's team ERA has been horrible the last few years. Even in 2023, that was the season Indiana won 40 games and was within 1 game of going to a super regional against LSU. LSU, of course, eventually won the national championship that year with Paul Skeens leading the way. But Indiana's team ERA in 2023, I should say, was 5.27. That was actually manageable, and that's actually not bad for a college team because Indiana was scoring 8 earned runs a game, and they were averaging probably 9 or 10 runs a game in 2023. It was ridiculous. But last year, the team ERA, and again right now for Indiana, it's about 6.5. It was 6.2 last season for Indiana. They didn't really have a third starter because of injuries. So fine, you can write that off. But now everybody's healthy, and the pitching staff is still inconsistent. I'm not going to say it's bad yet because, again, you've still got 40 games left. But you have aspirations of making a super regional here. You guys said that before the season if you're Indiana baseball. And the best way to make a super regional is to host a regional. Of course, double elimination, 4 teams per regional, and generally speaking, the host wins. And if the host doesn't win, it's considered an upset because the regionals are awarded to the top 16 seeds nationally. Sort of like women's college basketball, where the top 4 seeds host the first 2 rounds, like Indiana has done the last couple of years. It's kind of like that with baseball as well and softball. If you want to host, you've got to have more consistency from your pitching staff, and it's got to start now because these losses are going to start adding up. You've got to win the games you need to win. Okay, fine. Northern Kentucky made the same regional as you last year, and they got an auto bid and you didn't, so maybe they're good. But you put up 11 runs on them. That should win you the game, and it didn't. Indiana had a chance to beat Xavier at home. Couldn't do it. Xavier is a team that is going to have a decent NCAA tournament resume when the season is all said and done because of the non-conference schedule that they play. I think they play pretty much the entire SEC. It is ridiculous, and it doesn't make any sense, but they do it anyway. Twice in the opening weekend in Arizona, Indiana tied the game in the 9th inning and then immediately blew the lead and immediately gave up the lead again in the 10th. Those are the kinds of things that add up over the course of a season. So you don't want to overreact to small samples, but at the same time, you've got to start taking these repeated blunders as a sign of things to come, and those things may not be encouraging. So Indiana baseball takes on Penn State at 1 o'clock today. If Indiana loses this series, it's not the worst thing in the world, right? Because Penn State's a really good team. But these are the kinds of teams that you need to beat on a consistent basis if you want to host a regional and ultimately have a chance to make a super regional, which would be a step in the right direction for this Indiana baseball program. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Back on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotocap with you. It's a good time to remind you that it's a great time to save at IU Credit Union. Go to iucu.org to see their most current money market savings and certificate rates. That is iucu.org, IU Credit Union. And before the break, we were talking at length about Indiana baseball because for some reason, when I got to this campus 2.5 years ago, I took it upon myself to become a college baseball nerd, which is weird because Indiana's not a baseball school, nor has it been for nearly all of its existence. But we're talking about college baseball on a Sunday morning. I think that again, Indiana has so much talent on the offensive side, and I'm concerned that for them, when all is said and done, 2023 may have been their peak with that core group if the pitching staff can't get it together. Head coach Jeff Mercer has done a lot for this Indiana program since he was hired in 2019. They won a Big Ten title in his first year. I don't know how many coaches in a Power 4 conference can say that. Although there is some debate about whether the Big Ten is even a power conference in baseball because the Sun Belt is usually better than the Big Ten. So maybe the Sun Belt can be part of the new Power 5. We'll see. But Jeff Mercer's done a lot for this team, but you talk about the preseason expectations and then you fall flat on your face and you have to climb uphill for the rest of the year. It's tough to do that. And the best teams, again, the ones that are standing at the end of the season, are usually the ones with the deepest pitching staffs. And it seems that although this was a known issue for Indiana coming into the year, they may not have done enough to rectify it. So that is something to keep an eye on as the season unfolds. Again, you play 56 games. Indiana's played 15 at this point. They're 7-8. They'll take on Penn State at 1 o'clock today, go to Indiana State on Tuesday, and then take on Ohio State next weekend here in Bloomington, beginning on Friday at 6 p.m. Ohio State, if Indiana's pitching staff is bad, then Ohio State's pitching staff is made up of, I don't even know, retirees. Ohio State is one of the more oddball teams I have ever seen to start a season in any level of baseball. The Buckeyes basically had to rebuild their entire roster after they hired a new head coach. Came over from Campbell University, always a very successful college baseball program, and now leading the Buckeyes in his first season as the head man is, I do not remember his name off the top of my head, but he is a first-year head coach. And it's a tough spot to be in for Ohio State because, there's so many new pieces, and a lot of times you just don't know how they're going to fit together from the pitching side. Justin Hare, Ohio State's head coach, is a very tough task in front of him. And it has not been smooth sailing to start the year for Ohio State. They played a very tough schedule early in the year on the diamond, and they had late leads, as in leading in the 7th inning or later, in 6 of their first 9 games, and they started the season 1-8. So they had late leads in 6 out of 9 and started 1-8. That is not good. So I guess if you're an Indiana baseball fan, it could always be worse. Ohio State right now has a team earned run average. Again, ERA is not always the best indicator of pitching success, but a team ERA of 9.18. Whew, that's rough. That is by far the worst in the Big Ten. They have a team whip of over 2 walks plus hits per inning pitched. You want to be around 1.2, 1.4. Ohio State is at 2 flat. It is bad. Really bad for Ohio State's pitching staff right now. And if you want to point the finger, you point the finger at their roster turnover. Basically, they lost every single good pitcher that they had last season, I should say. Last year, they finished 7th in the Big Ten. They upset Nebraska in the opening round of the conference tournament, and then Indiana beat them the next day. That game was ridiculous, by the way, at Charles Schwab Field in Omaha. They beat Nebraska 15-2 in 7 innings behind a very strong start from Landon Beidelshees, who is now at Arkansas. Beidelshees, a starter, he's a right-hander, not a lefty. But basically, every single good Ohio State pitcher from last year either transferred, as is the case of Landon Beidelshees and others, or graduated. So they had to retool their entire pitching staff. They lost, I think, 73% of the innings pitched from a year ago, did Ohio State baseball, and they have not gotten off to a good start. So if you're Indiana, not that you're going to overlook the last game against Penn State today and Indiana State on Tuesday, because if you do that, you run the risk of losing. But Indiana is actually in a decent spot here if they can get away with the rubber match against Penn State and win at Indiana State on Tuesday, which is a place that has been tough to win at in Terre Haute, but it's a very different program there now that Mitch Hanna's is at South Florida. Indiana wins both of those games, and then your stacked offense, which basically just does nothing but hit bombs at this point, led by Corbin Dickerson, who is 2nd in the nation in home runs and 12th nationally in RBIs after not playing at all at Louisville, which is very strange. But you're in a spot where you can blitz Ohio State because you know their pitching staff is bad. So if nothing else, get the starters' pitch counts up, get them out of the game, and just let the bullpen serve up cookies to you or walk you a bunch. If that's the case, then take your walks and move on. But Indiana baseball still can turn this around and get on a run and start playing well. And it could start as soon as today at 1 o'clock on Big Ten Plus in Happy Valley when they take on Penn State. That's going to be, I think, a battle of offenses, as is usually the case when Indiana plays Penn State. Penn State has one of the best offenses in the Big Ten. They are loaded. They are a sleeper for a lot of people, not just to make the NCAA tournament, but maybe to make a run at Omaha. There are better teams in the Big Ten on paper, like Oregon, Nebraska, and on paper, Indiana, but the games aren't played on paper. So watch out for Penn State baseball. They could be a fun team to watch as the season wears on. Speaking of seasons wearing on, Indiana football will be back before we know it, and they had their first spring practice yesterday. The opening day, Cignetti was wearing a really cool hat. I don't know where he got the hat, but it looked cool. He was wearing his usual sweatsuit, and Fernando Mendoza was, doing what he does best, which is throwing footballs really well. As a quarterback, you would hope that he can do that. But for Indiana, spring practice being here means that the season's going to be here before you know it. We got glimpses of Roman Hemby, the Maryland transfer running back, Aiden Fisher, Mikhail Kamara coming back will be huge on defense for Indiana as they look to build on that 11-2 season and that college football playoff berth that they had last year, which nobody expected. Nobody except Curt Cignetti and all the players anyway. But Cignetti, very matter of fact, very realistic. This is, the first in a long line of spring practices. And again, the spring game coming up in about a month. You don't want to put too much stock in anything that you see at the spring game because it's basically a glorified practice. That said, I do expect a decent amount of people to show up because it's Curt Cignetti, and now everybody knows what this program is about, and nobody will be surprised by Indiana this year. They're not going to sneak up on anyone. But Fernando Mendoza, between the way he threw yesterday and the way he threw at the pro day that IU had this past week, I'm excited. And Cignetti talked about it yesterday. He said that overall he thought Mendoza did well. Given that he's exposed to a different scheme, different concepts, timing might be tough for Mendoza getting the ball out of his hand. And also the fact that he faced a lot of pass rush at Cal. His offensive line was not very good. He was throwing under duress a lot. And that's something that Indiana is trying to protect him from this year. The offensive line, they focused a lot on pass protection for Indiana. That way Mendoza can play in rhythm. So it'll be interesting to see how he develops throughout the spring and the summer. Cignetti's not going to name him as the starter, but he is the projected QB1 at this point in the offseason for Indiana. I would expect that to stay, barring injury. But if Mendoza is well protected, I think that he could be just as good, if not better, than Curtis Rourke, because, again, barring injury, Mendoza will not be playing on a torn ACL for the entire year. It still blows my mind that Curtis Rourke was able to do that. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotocap with you. Springing forward, the sun is up later. It's going to stay up later, too, which is really nice because I'm tired of it setting at what seems like 5 p.m. every day for the past 17 years. So that is a thing of the past, and so, too, soon will be college basketball season, which is disappointing. Because it seems so long but so short at the same time. It seems like, it was just yesterday Indiana was picked to win the Big Ten, and now they're not winning the Big Ten. But anyway, we look at games today as the Big Ten men close their regular season, those, of course, who did not play yesterday, which gives us a 4-game slate of Big Ten basketball, beginning with a big one. Big Ten Hoops kicks off at noon with Michigan and Michigan State. Big for Big Ten seeding purposes because Michigan is such a lucky team. But anyway, Michigan State and Michigan 1-2 in the Big Ten. Michigan State 16-3. Michigan is 14-5. So the result's not going to change. At the top, Michigan State will have locked up the Big Ten title, I believe, today. Which is ridiculous because Tom Izzo is the motto of consistency year in and year out. It just seems like his teams always find a way to get it done. So that game starts at noon in East Lansing. Iowa-Nebraska could be interesting for Big Ten bubble purposes, of course. The bottom 3 teams missing the tournament. Iowa is right now in the bottom 3. And if they win, it would be, at least in terms of record, a 3-way tie between them, USC, and Northwestern for the final spot out of the Big Ten tournament. So you'd have to go, I'd assume, to head-to-head tiebreakers there. But right now, the bottom 3, Iowa, Penn State, Washington. Washington at 4-15 in conference play will not make the conference tournament, regardless of what happens today when they play Oregon. But Iowa, I think, still may have a chance to play themselves off the bubble and into the conference tournament. So they've still got something to play for. Again, that's a team that beat Indiana by 25 in Iowa City. So what in the world, man? One of those puzzling losses that happened a little too much under Mike Woodson. One of the reasons I think that he and Indiana agreed to part ways. Minnesota and Rutgers as well. That's big for seeding purposes as well. So we should know the seeds for the Big Ten tournament, all of them, at about 3 o'clock today after Minnesota and Rutgers concludes. So as far as Indiana is concerned, the Hoosiers are locked in the 8-9 game against Oregon. Oregon will be the 8, Indiana will be the 9. And I think, honestly, I like Indiana in that game. Not just because they played Oregon down to the wire in Eugene with horrendous officiating going the way of the Ducks, but I just like Indiana. Oregon's got to travel all the way back here to the Midwest. Indiana gets to go an hour up the road to Indy. You know, you could take a bus if you wanted to. I don't know if they'll take a plane or they'll take a bus, but either way, it's a short trip. And I think that gives an advantage to Indiana. I don't know how well Oregon basketball fans travel. I'll be honest, I didn't really keep up with Pac-12 attendance for the last handful of years, but Dana Altman's a really good coach. I'm sure regardless of the outcome, it will be a fun game. Indiana wins that one. They'll be off the first four bubble for sure. You lose it, you get some bid stealers, you might have some trouble. And I don't know what really to make of that until it happens. So we look at games around the country today, important games. There are some conference title games happening today as well. Winthrop and High Point in the Big South Championship. And that's interesting because if you remember back to when Indiana played Winthrop, that was a 1-point game with 3 minutes left. So maybe Winthrop is just really good. I don't know. Of note, on the Winthrop roster is Logan Duncombe, former Indiana player, who never really did much here, so you would be forgiven for forgetting that he was ever on the Indiana roster. 2 o'clock, Lipscomb and University of Northern Alabama in the ASUN final. And then a big one to keep an eye on for the purposes of potential future Indiana head coaches is Drake and Bradley in the Missouri Valley Conference final on CBS. That's at 2:10. The conclusion of Arch Madness in St. Louis. And I say it's important for the Indiana basketball coaching search because Ben McCollum is the Drake head coach. Drake, of course, beat Indiana State in Arch Madness last year and took the auto bid away from the Sycamores. And Drake has, been extremely successful each of the last 2 years. 28-7, 16-4 in conference last year for the Bulldogs, including that win over number 1 Indiana State in the MVC Championship. And then this season, they've been even better. 29-3, 17-3 in conference play. Absurd success, although when they faced off against Bradley at home, they lost by 2. But since that loss, they have won 6 in a row, including a pair of overtime games. So it seems to me that whenever Ben McCollum has, the game on the line, it seems like he finds a way to come through more often than not. Drake has won 6 in a row. They will take on Bradley at 2 o'clock. Wouldn't be surprised if Ben McCollum is part of the coaching search, but I have no way of knowing for sure. And regardless of what anybody tells you, neither do they, because Indiana has been very quiet about this coaching search. And I wouldn't expect that to change. I think, honestly, they're just going to come out one day and say, hey, here's the next head coach, and that'll be the end of it. Probably in mid-April. I don't know. I have nothing to back that up. But I would suspect that it's going to be very cut and dry once Indiana makes a coaching decision. I wouldn't mind Ben McCollum. I wouldn't mind anybody as long as they're consistent and they can win. I think that's all anybody cares about anymore. Whether or not they have a connection to the program doesn't really matter. In fact, I would think a lot of fans probably prefer it if the new head coach does not have any prior connection to the program. So, that said, Indiana could have had Dusty May and they didn't, and they missed out. Because Dusty May has still orchestrated a fantastic turnaround at Michigan, even though they fell out of first place in the conference and their rivals in East Lansing took over. But Ben McCollum, one to keep an eye on, maybe the future Indiana head coach. You can get a look at him and Drake as they go for the MVC title at 2 o'clock on CBS. That should be a fun game to watch. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotocap with you, and as the NCAA tournament field begins to get filled out, we will soon have an entire 68-team bracket, and that makes me very excited. The Big Ten is projected to be a 10-bid league. The Big 12 an 8-bid league, and at the top, of course, the SEC, the big bad SEC, which is apparently the best conference ever. At least that's what ESPN told me, so I'm going to believe them. We look at the 1 seeds, no surprises really anywhere. This shouldn't change unless a bunch of chaos happens, and even then, I don't know if it's going to change. Auburn, Duke, Florida, Houston, probably not going to change. As for teams around Indiana in the bracket, you look at the last 4 byes, one of which is Indiana, the others Arkansas, Baylor, Utah State. One of the last 4 in, according to Joe Lunardi, which makes absolutely no sense to me, Oklahoma, along with Xavier, Ohio State, San Diego State, which, again, if Indiana lost yesterday, Indiana would be one of the last four in, instead one of the last four byes. So that win against Ohio State, that shot from Trey Galloway, absolutely huge. But Oklahoma, I should say, 6-12 in the SEC, and you think they should be in the tournament? I know that the SEC is really good, so somebody has to be the victim of the conference beating the crap out of each other while clearly being the deepest league in the country. I get that. But what in the world? 6-12 and you think they deserve a bid? I don't get that. Maybe there's something I'm missing, right? Maybe I'm just not getting the full picture, right? But Oklahoma being in when they won 33% of their conference games makes no sense. And they're 46th in the net, which is good. That's just below Xavier, actually above Indiana. But I don't know, something about that just does not sit right with me. Now, by that same token, ESPN I think also tried to push for North Carolina being in. That makes even less sense. I guess you could justify Oklahoma by saying that, oh, well, they played in a brutal conference and their computer metrics are good, so they should be in. Okay, fine. But people try to justify North Carolina being in as well. Absolutely not. No. North Carolina, 20-12 overall. Yes, they went 13-7 in the SEC, but they lost, 13-7 in the ACC. They lost 7 games in one of the weakest ACC conferences ever. Ever. I mean, the ACC, aside from Duke, Louisville, and Clemson, and maybe Wake Forest, has like nobody that's even remotely close to sniffing the tournament. We'll go back to the net rankings because the ACC has been historically bad. I think UNC was 1-12 in Quad 1 games this year. As we look at North Carolina and their record, 1-11 in Quad 1 games after last night when they lost to Duke. 1-11 in Quad 1. Indiana has a better record in Quad 1 games than that, and Indiana is barely in. UNC had chances against teams outside the ACC, and they did not get it done. They lost to Kansas early in the year. They lost to Auburn. They lost to Michigan State. They lost to Alabama. They lost to Florida. They lost to Louisville. That would have been a Quad 1 game. They needed overtime to beat Boston College at home. Boston College is not very good. They got blown out by Duke both times. They got blown out by Clemson. The list goes on. UNC had chances to get those Quad 1 wins, and they routinely squandered those chances. UNC should not be in the tournament. Indiana should, because Indiana has shown better performance in Quad 1 games and was better in a stronger conference. Okay, not better by record, fine. But as far as metrics go, I think Indiana should be looked at more favorably than North Carolina. North Carolina should not even sniff the tournament, to be honest with you. If they beat Duke last night, you could have argued that, they got their resume win at the last possible time of asking, and they improved to a whopping 2-10 in Quad 1 games, but that is not what happened. So UNC, yes, they're 20-12, but the ACC was historically awful this year, and UNC could not take advantage. And so we look at the ACC as a whole. As far as teams in the top 50 in the net, you had Duke at the top, very top of the net right now, Clemson, Louisville, UNC, and SMU, and that is it. Outside the net, you have the final 13 teams in the conference, Pitt, Wake Forest, Florida State, and then outside the top 100, Notre Dame, who played a ridiculous 4-overtime game against Cal yesterday, which was insane. Virginia at 102, Georgia Tech, you could go on. Cal is all the way down at 126. The conference just isn't very good this year. The ACC isn't. NC State, fresh off that Final Four, finished the season 12-19, 0-11 on the road, and 0-8 in Quad 1 games, proving that may have been the greatest fluke Final Four run ever. Virginia Tech down at 164, Boston College at 200. The ACC has a whole bunch of teams that have no business being anywhere, and it was just a bad conference, and North Carolina did not play well when they had chances to boost their resume. They're one of the first 4 out, but Oklahoma is one of the first 4 in. Oklahoma went 6-12 in the SEC. I wouldn't be surprised if they get upset. if you're Oklahoma. That's my take. Again, I didn't watch a ton of Oklahoma basketball, but again, 6-12 in your conference, really? I don't understand it. But at least I'm one of the people that understands that every conference goes 500 against itself in league play. Unlike Archie Miller and Carl Ravitch. Oh, man, that was brutal. Archie said something like, I saw that something that since January 1st, teams are 68-68 in SEC play. Everybody's trying to win games. Of course, in every conference game, one team's going to win and one team's going to lose. That's how every game in every sport works. So, yeah, don't get caught out by misinformation. Check yourself before you wreck yourself. That's going to do it for us on IU Sports Sunday today. Again, Indiana baseball is in action at 1 o'clock. If you want your IU sports fix, then you've got IU baseball. The NCAA women's selection show is next weekend, next Sunday. The Indiana women will be in. They'll probably be a 9 seed, most likely. They're playing extremely well right now, so I wouldn't want to be a 1 seed. If I was them, I would be circling Indiana as a team I don't want to face. The Big Ten tournament on the men's side will kick off in Indianapolis on Wednesday. Indiana plays the first game on Thursday. That's Thursday at noon against Oregon, much like the women did this past week. So the men will be looking for revenge after their loss in Eugene this past Tuesday, and hopefully Jackson Shelstad doesn't make an impossible heave from 30 feet out with a hand in his face. And with that, we will take a look at the schedule for the rest of the day. The Big South Championship, man, that's going to be fun. Coverage kicks off at 11:45, followed by the NBC Championship. Coverage begins at 2. And again, Ben McCollum coaching Drake in the Missouri Valley Conference. He could be the next Indiana head coach, so keep your eyes peeled. You've been listening to IU Sports Sunday.